Well, good evening, everybody. I think I met everybody. Did we? We didn't get to see
Penny.
you yesterday, did we?
I didn't see you,
Okay.
but I was there.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Sorry about that. I'm Ben.
Okay.
Nice to meet you. So I'm going to kick off the training this morning, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit, or this morning.
It's okay. It's a long way time difference,
I tell you
right?
what, as we were driving in yesterday, I literally said, I asked Keith, I was like, what day is it? And then as soon as I said that, Randy goes, what city are we in? That's exactly how it feels. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the promotion point. As you know, the Main Street model, the Main Street approach, as we call it, has this 4-point approach of economic vitality, design, organization, and promotion. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that promotion point. Promotion obviously is the best and most important point of those 4 points. So anything else that you would learn about is a waste of time. But actually, I want to try to simplify it. The goal of promotion is really threefold: to create retail promotions, to program special events, and to cultivate a positive message. The promotion point is an interesting part of the Main Street model because it's actually the one that typically, and Randy, jump in if you don't agree with this, but typically it ends up kind of overshadowing the others because a lot of times Main Street organizations end up putting on festivals in the communities, and the organization kind of becomes known as an event programmer. And it sometimes overshadows some of those other strategic functions from design-related services and economic development services that they might typically be doing. So we want to be real mindful of that balance because it is important to really manage those. The way that they like to talk about this is there are 3 different kinds of events that the organization can put on. The first is image development activities, the second is special events, and the third is retail and business activities. We'll talk about each of these real quickly, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So the first is image development activities, and the goal of this is to start to change the negatives and to promote the positives. Pretty simple. It actually sounds a little bit nebulous, but once you get into it, this is everything from developing merchandise. And, you know, in your community, there's a lot of merchandise that exists. It's all kind of focused around the high school. There are a lot of Panthers going on. But also just being able to have things to show that connection that somebody has to their community. Something else that you might do is things like promotional brochures. I always kind of talk about this idea of merchandise in that we want our businesses to profit off of the connection that people have with the community. Oftentimes it's almost like we villainize profit. We want you to make money. We want you to make lots of money. So creating shirts that people want to have, creating merchandise that looks good. Oftentimes, you know, if you do have a non-sports related local shirt, it's typically what we call a car wash shirt. It's got like 9,000 logos on the back, and it's so ugly that you only cut the grass or paint in it. So having things that are really kind of merchandise driven and kind of consumer driven is important. Some other things that you can really do is use signage and use images in the community to help change the tone of available properties and opportunities exist. I will say, and this is a little bit negative, but one of the things that stuck out yesterday as we were walking around, and I'm not sure exactly which building it was, but as we were walking around, there was one building that's for rent. It's obviously been for rent for a very long time because they put vinyl for rent letters on the outside of the glass in a permanent fashion. The vinyl letters have started to come off. About 6 years worth of dirt is now stuck in the. That's not the way that a prospect is going to look and say, wow, that's the location I'm going to use to take a chance. Right.
When you walk in.
I always share the story. The community that I grew up, Greenville, South Carolina, we had this great, like, underground space where you're walking on the sidewalk and then you have to walk down the stairs to go to it. And when it was mid-90s and it came up available and it said property available, and it was like bookstore, restaurant, and then it said Cheers Bar, question mark, because it was that same entrance that a Cheers would have had. So, you know, being able to kind of connect and excite people about that opportunity. One of the other things, I will give you total props. We didn't hear anybody yesterday complain about parking. Our goal as Main Street organizations is to create parking problems. We want to have more consumers than we have parking spaces, right? But one of the cool things that Main Streets has started to do is they started to kind of own that dialogue. We create little business card maps that highlight all the parking that's available and that kind of stuff. One of the things that's a little interesting is as you think about reconfiguring some of your space, I mean, one of the things we talked about with the dugout is possibility of reclaiming some space, introducing outdoor dining, and that might be perceived as taking away certain parking amenities. So how do you kind of navigate that and have those amenities?
Can I teach them a phrase?
Absolutely.
If anybody gives you hassles about parking, here's your logic. You either have a parking problem or you have a downtown problem.
Yeah.
If you don't have a parking problem, you have a downtown problem. That's a much harder problem to fix.
Yes.
So a parking problem is actually a good thing.
Absolutely.
There's never
Absolutely.
been a good downtown that didn't have a parking.
And just, and I'm showing these not because you're necessarily going to need this, but I always like to spur creative thinking. Image building is anytime you identify a negative interaction that somebody might have with your community, and then you think creative ways to work around that. So in State College, Pennsylvania, we had a lot of people who were getting parking violations, and we had very few people that were using their parking garages. So instead of giving an automatic parking ticket, they started to adopt a courtesy ticket where they were saying, hey, obviously you've enjoyed being here because you're here longer than you paid for. Next time, why don't you take advantage of our parking garage where you can stay all day? So, you know, taking that opportunity to introduce additional information, and then if you really need to hit them over the head, there's nowhere to park downtown except for the 2,037 spaces. You know, it's okay to be sarcastic when need be.
Yeah.
In some communities, we deal with really negative perceptions and misperceptions. We were in San Pedro, California, and people kept talking about how unsafe it was. And yet, as Randy and I walked around, we saw people walking all the time. We saw, you know, families walking together. So we wanted to kind of hit that head on. From there, we move into special events. Special events are those things that bring excitement and potential customers to your district. These are the things that are used in very, very small microcosms to show people that you can get warm bodies to Monroe City. Okay? So I want you to think about that definition and think about some of the promotions that you've done, because as we wrap up the three definitions, I want to make sure that we know what are we doing and what do we still need to think about doing. So a couple of these really are our festivals. This is something that we came up with in Athens, Alabama. It's called the Grease Festival. A little play on words there. It's a celebration of all things deep fried. So they do a lot of toga wearing. But again, this brings people from throughout the region to come explore Athens. Community, and you're going to hear a little bit about this, I think, in a minute with Randy, but Art Fields in Lake City, South Carolina. Art Fields is a great arts festival that brings people into the community. In Ellensburg, Washington, they do a thing called Buskers and the Bird, where they really bring the streets to life and they introduce people. Typically, if you're having to close the street down, it's a special event. You're really going over the top. Now, there's some other things that are kind of confusing sometimes. Trick-or-treat events. If you've ever owned a downtown business, trick-or-treat events are not necessarily fun for you. And this idea that they're going to make the cash registers ring, that's not really how that works. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means you have to understand what it is that you're doing here. It's a gift back to the community. It is a long-term investment instead of a short-term return. The exact same thing with a lot of our holiday events, our Christmas tree lightings, things like that. So then the final category is our retail and business activities. This is what makes the cash registers ring. These are the promotions that really help the Main Street organization and the business community to have a good relationship. You can get really creative with these. I would say that your strolls fall into this. Um, I'm a big believer that on retail type events, the reason that street closures are weird is because they create an atypical environment. I like retail events where you're truly teaching a consumer to interact with the district the way that it exists. We came up with this event called Saving Mother's Day in Fairmont, West Virginia, where they had 12 different businesses in downtown. They had a local florist. The florist provided a different kind of flower to each business. Have you? That's awesome.
The last one we got very happy with put down with the florist, and she felt like it was taking the money away from her.
Gotcha. Well, so
But yeah, we done it, but you go to each business
And
and.
gather a
find
flower.
a weird spot, because you had to go through our business to find the flowers
Perfect.
from the person. And then, but we just called it building your Christmas or your Mother's Day photo.
fantastic. I love
And
that.
it worked really well. It got brought a lot of people in. Some people didn't even know about it when they come in from other towns and they got a flower and they're like, oh, well, we didn't come for that. Or,
Nice.
You know, yeah, so it
That's
was
great.
fun.
That's great. In the same category as your wine walks, strangely, people like to go to multiple locations and consume alcoholic beverages. And one of the weird things about wine walks is a lot of times we lose focus on them being retail events, and making sure that you have the opportunity to sell. That's an important part of this. Same thing with our art walks, having, whether it's live performers or you're having art located in multiple stops, getting them into the retail establishments. And then of course restaurant week events where you're highlighting the food and you're really kind of inviting people to explore and taste different flavors. And then of course we have our extended hours campaigns. These are, if you've ever owned a business, this is not fun. It's not a fun conversation to have. You have one side that's like, well, it's easy, just stay open later. And there's another side that's like, well, I actually love my family and would like to see them every now and then.
12 hours in the first
Right,
place, yeah.
exactly. So one of the big things, and we'll share this with you, but it's is setting the appropriate expectations. It takes about 3 years to change consumer behavior. Luckily, the combination of your remoteness and the size of your community, I would say that you already have a pretty good connection with your local market, but anytime you're planning an extended hours campaign, you just want to make sure to manage expectations. Typically, they
I
last.
know when you done the Christmas walk, we were open, late, and it was very good, and yeah, we were dead the next day, but it was very nice.
Right. The goal is to change consumer behavior. Typically what happens is people decide they're going to stay open the third Thursday of every month, and that lasts about 3 months. And then they're like, well, we're staying open, but nobody's here. And it's like, really? This isn't Field of Dreams. Like, this is, you actually have to truly reprogram customer behavior. So that'll be something to kind of factor in. But again, you're a small community, you've got a small population, want to make sure that you're using those events and using those volunteer resources in a way that's beneficial to the business community. And then one of the other things that we want to show and kind of share is this idea of thinking about your entire year and the events that you put on very strategically. So what you're seeing here is 3 different colors to signify the 3 different types of events. That kind of weird yellow line is, you can kind of draw a line of what you think your business might be like over the course of the year. Now, this line is actually a line that I drew over in Kirksville earlier in the week because, of course, in the middle of the summer, all the students leave. Well, you're a community that serves as a gateway to lake traffic. You might actually find that instead of taking a summer dip, you take a summer bump. So, understanding when is business good, when is business slower, and how should you use your events? Should you use your events to maximize the peak times, or should you use your events to help increase the weak times? So being able to go after that, I think, is really important. And then the next thing that I want to share is really more about whole organization communication. Main Street is really good at being effective and really horrible at telling its story. We've been around for over 40 years, and people still don't know what Main Street is. So that's one of the things that's, it's a little frustrating. It's frustrating as you're involved when you're like, oh, I'm serving on the local Main Street board, and they're like, what in the world is that? So I want to give you a quick history lesson if we we rewind back to 1977. The National Trust for Historic Preservation was having trouble convincing building owners to restore historic buildings. They were fighting urban renewal, they were fighting demolition. So their goal was a preserved building, and the thing that they wanted to have happen was a property owner to make an investment, okay? So the thing that they realized was you need to have a strong economy to be able to convince that building owner to make that investment, right? Makes sense. So what they accidentally did was invent holistic economic development. They were sitting in a hotel room, they said 3 points seems too simple, 5 points is too complicated, so they came up with this 4-point approach, and it's kind of gone from there. But Main Street really is the pioneers of modern economic development. They're the ones that are going out, and they're kind of, it makes sense. You're looking at how the place feels, you're bringing people in and introducing them, you're working with prospects in economic development, and you're telling the community and having them support it. So we're bad at telling that story. We oftentimes do that through things like mission statements. Have y'all done that yet?
Yes, sir.
How many months did that take? Did y'all do it in one meeting?
Yes, sir.
Y'all, I figured y'all did. The
Or
interesting
less.
thing, do you remember it? Do you have it memorized?
No, sir.
Good. That's not our elevator speech. You don't have to have it memorized. A mission statement really is more of an internal document anyway. The big thing that we want you all to think about is why. Why are you doing this? When you tell somebody that you're involved in downtown Monroe City, if they say, why are you doing that? What would you say? You just got recruited. Why are
Because
you
Debbie
doing
said,
it?
come on.
Bring more business to town and
Okay.
get our Main Street full of businesses. Bring back the community.
Bring back the community.
Don't
Okay.
want to-
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Why are you doing it? Why are you putting the time in?
Me, because I grew up here and I want to see my town be a successful town and
Not
not
die
a,
out.
yeah. you know,
Perfect.
yeah.
Absolutely. And that really is the thing that for some reason, I'm not sure why we're so hesitant to be emotional about it. But it's like when people ask me, why is it that you spend so much time working with Main Street organizations? I mean, there are other things out there. I could go and talk about tourism and all that kind of stuff, but I love Main Street. And when they ask me why I do this, it's like, I have 5 kids, and I believe that being connected to your home makes a grounded person, and a grounded person makes a great citizen. And that's why I give my time, and that's why I contribute, because I believe in this. Well, we need to not just focus on that what we're doing and how we're doing it, but focus on why we're doing it. A couple examples there, what are we doing? We're trying to preserve these buildings. We're trying to make sure that these unique structures that only Monroe City has don't go away. Well, how are we doing them? Well, we launched a facade grant program. Why are we doing it? We're doing it because nobody else has these buildings. There is not another place that looks like this. So that's that emotion that people connect with. Same thing, we're putting on events. Why? Because we want to create vibrancy. What are we doing? We're putting on events and festivals. Why? You come, you experience it. It's like, you know what? I think maybe I want to try this. I think I want to take a step. Now, order matters. This is a weird concept, but believe it or not, in 2019, when you start with information and data and truth, people don't believe it. It's not even that they don't want to know it. It's that they don't believe it. We have this whole world of fake news. It's like, oh, well, where did those numbers come from? And so this idea of emotions before data, that is the way that you open the door to be able to communicate. And people truly want to hear. I mean, that was one of the cool things, like, as we met with you all yesterday at lunch over at Dugout, and we started to hear stories, and we started to, it's like we're sitting there, and the next thing you know, your dad's at that table, and your husband's at that table, and all this kind of stuff, and then, all of a sudden we're getting served by your grandson that we know we're meeting with later, and like there was a personal connection that was created, and then we went out and we were able to receive all this information.
And thank you for not saying how Tony was giving me all kinds of crap about my
Well,
Mountain
I
Dew.
mean, hey, it's not your fault that they ran out of green beans. Right? But you know, I love this quote: "Nobody ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart." This is so true. Like what you're doing here, we heard a little of that frustration of there being so few of you. It's like we need help, we need more people. But you're starting a movement, and you're the small group that will inspire that change. We all kind of heard the 20-60-20 rule, you know, where it's like 20% positive and 20% negative, 60% in the middle will go either way. Well, you're trying to sway the tide, and it feels lonely sometimes. But just remember, you have permission to talk about why you love this place and why you're putting your time in. Something else I'm going to share with you is, if you remember, I'm a child of the 80s, so I love a good old Mad Lib. You know, with those mission statements, as I said, those are internal documents. I created this Mad Lib as a simple way for you to kind of draft a statement to tell people why you're involved in the DTLC. It's just this idea that everybody has to say the exact same thing. That's a fallacy. You know, we're all about changing our message now. You know, everybody needs to be able to talk about why they are doing what they're doing. And then the meat of this section is the cool thing that we've come to realize is of the 2,000 Main Street programs across the country, all of them have the same 5 audiences. You're communicating to donors, you're communicating to owners, the public, volunteers, and government. We know that to be true. You just got back from communicating to the government, right? When you market your events, you're out there talking to the public. When you're going out and you're offering facade grants and you're offering design services, you're working with the owners. When you're asking for resources, you're asking for donations, you're talking with the donors. When you're asking for a hand and you're asking for people to help, you're talking to the volunteers. When you think about these 5 audiences, when you think about how to use your time and your resources, be as efficient as possible, and be mindful of the things that are hitting on multiple audiences at once. Events are great for that. They hit multiple audiences. We're going to share some additional resources with you that maybe will help long term. This is a communication map where you can just think about what you're doing. If this gives you a headache, don't worry about it. You're new, you're young, you're small, don't get bogged down. These might be tools if you have any type A's in the group that really like to have color charts. Do you have any color chart people?
I don't know. Do we? I like to color them in, but
This is how I think. I can't think about things unless I see it there. So here's where it gets kind of fun though, is when we start to talk about branding. Now, you guys, I got a couple questions for you as I go through this. I'm gonna tell you some of the things that I've learned, and then I'm gonna ask some questions because I actually said to the group that we had lunch with yesterday, I'm pretty sure you guys are gonna make me break my own rules. So I've been doing branding for about 20 years, and I have worked with over 600 communities in 40 states and 5 countries. I've probably done more of this than anybody else. So I've learned some lessons here and there. I think it's always important to kind of start with this question, why do we brand? And have an illustration that I like to share. It's like how you would celebrate your kid's birthday. Okay? In fact, my oldest son is 14 today, so
Aw.
they're making a cake
Dad.
and eating as we speak now. That's okay. My dog is turning 1 tomorrow, and I'll be back for that. And that's the birthday.
that is so wrong.
Actually matters. We're all very excited about Maggie's birthday. We're not as excited about Nathan's. So, in 1940s, you'd go to the local grocer. You'd spend about 50 cents. You'd buy raw materials, and you'd go home and make a cake. By the 60s, you'd go to that local grocer. You'd buy a box, spend about $2, 1 cake mix. By the 80s, you'd go to the chain grocery store. You'd spend about $12 on one of those quarter sheet cakes. Now we're spending $500 on Fortnite trailers. What this illustrates for us is this kind of transition from raw material into a product, into a service, and now the experience economy. Because our consumers are so focused on experiences, telling our stories and crafting our message has become important. When all it was raw materials, nobody cared. It seems like fluff, but now it's actually business strategy. So my definition is branding is the discovery and preservation of a community's personality. As I come in and listen to you all talk and think about this community, I'm not creating something, I'm not creating a brand. I'm listening to the things that you're passionate about and trying to give you some tools to help preserve that. Does that make sense? The goal that you're shooting for is creating brand equity. Well, what is brand equity? I can illustrate it. How much does this cost? Take a guess.
$25,400.
Oh, a Mercedes?
I know,
Oh, is that
the
what
guys
that's
don't
saying?
see
Oh,
the front.
sorry, I didn't look at that part. I'm
I
wrong.
know, I was like, you forgot the logo in the front, guys.
Well, you watch that stuff. I don't.
Listen at
Remind
it.
me.
I love that. You actually are breaking the illustration in the best possible way. So Mercedes, how much is it at?
It's probably 60.
Okay, perfect. See,
I know what that
30,000 to 60,000 because the logo on the front changed. Well, the punchline here is this is actually a Kia.
Let's see.
The logo, look.
I see the logo.
Yeah.
I saw that.
I even changed the logo
saw
in
that.
the wheel too.
Yeah.
So, you know, the fact is, what this really kind of illustrates for us is, a lot of times there's this value and this emotion that's connected behind the brand that might not actually have anything to do with the product itself. There's a built-in confidence. There's a perception that comes along with it. There's how other people think of you when you invest in it. That same concept applies to our communities. And it's amazing how many times communities consider economic development efforts and all this kind of stuff. They want to spend money and go out and have recruiters and have people analyze retail market analysis and blah, 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 blah. And a lot of times I'm like, you know what would be better to do? Create a cool factor. Because it is amazing the things that happen when you become cool. All these companies that you talk to and they say, oh, we're not going to move, we're not moving there, we're not going to locate there, you don't have the rooftops until you're cool, and then they'll break their own rules every day. So, you know, being able to capture that brand equity, being able to cultivate cool is hugely important in your community. 5 rules for you to remember, okay? Rule number 1 is called the khaki rule. Say no to design by committee. You guys have a logo. I think it was designed by the designer over at A&S Printing, right? You can tell it was designed by a designer. It's different than a lot of the Main Street logos that I've come across, and I applaud you for that. I always make the joke that Main Street logos are kind of like the West Side Story. You're either a shark or a jet. They're all either a skyline or a street sign. So you guys did something a little bit different. I do have some recommendations. I'm going to feel that out a little, but just remember this idea of design by committee. The thing that results from design by committee is consensus and mediocrity. And in the world of branding and the world of trying to stick out, you don't want to be mediocre. If we all sat around this table and came up with one and only one outfit that we would wear for the rest of our lives, chances are we're going to wear khaki pants. Probably going to wear like a blue polo shirt, and then we'll end up looking like we work at Best Buy, right? So we want to avoid that consensus when we talk about sticking out. I've got a quick example for you. This is something that we did in Kittitas County, Washington. This is the first place east of Snoqualmie Pass. This is where the gray of Seattle stops, and you actually get to see the colors of the sky again. So we came up with this whole idea of live life in color. Well, what did they do? The first thing that the committee said was, well, that doesn't really tell people where we are. What if we had a map of the state of Washington and then highlighted where our county was. And, oh, well, we're a county, so we have to incorporate the name of every city in our county into our logo, to be fair, because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And, you know, Washington color, that doesn't really tell people that we're in the middle of the state and centrally located. So with each iteration, it got worse and worse and worse. And finally, once they hit this, somebody on the committee was like, hey, I'm not sure if anybody noticed, but that logo is absolutely horrible. And they backpedaled back to the original. But this idea of really being comfortable with breaking out and telling a unique story. Rule number 2 is the contest rule. Don't ever do design competitions. Yes?
I said,
There's a reason why you don't ever see a design competition for a bridge. It's just not really the way it works. These are some products that came out of community design competitions. This is a community in India. What you think?
Busy.
They,
going on there?
they get points for thoroughness, right?
They had a lot of triangles.
Yeah. This is a community in Germany.
Doesn't
Yeah.
like a body part.
They're
It does look like a
colon.
body part.
They're colon.
As soon as it came out, somebody photoshopped
Like their jeans.
E.T.'s head onto the website.
Yeah, it
So-
is.
Hilarious.
But one of the other things that's kind of interesting that happens oftentimes as communities is they try to be too cute. They especially do this with taglines. La Crosse, Kansas, the barbed wire capital of the world. Okay, well, they wanted to say something that nobody else could say. They ended up saying something nobody else wanted to say. It gets worse in Kansas. Gas, Kansas, don't pass gas, stop and enjoy it.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
yeah, literally it's a
Yes.
fart joke.
But that would go viral on Facebook.
I mean, it would, but I will tell you this, all publicity is not good publicity.
That's
That's a fallacy of the advertising world. In that same vein,
my.
Hooker, Oklahoma, it's a location, not a location. I wish that this was a joke, but literally their local sports teams are the Horny Toads.
Almost as bad
As
as.
what?
What's a hooker? Always a hooker? Really?
Wow.
Do they? Their
Yeah.
senior center sell once a hooker, always a hooker t-shirts.
Oh,
I know.
Wow.
Pretty much.
And then the worst that I come across, Severance, Colorado, where the geese fly and the bulls cry. What in the world does that mean? Well, they're the home of Bruce's Bar, known for Rocky Mountain oysters.
Yeah, that's
So-
why they're crying.
So literally
Okay.
their entire identity is wrapped around bull testicles.
Exactly.
Rule number 3, and luckily you have avoided this, but it's called the seal rule. Do not use city seals as marketing tools. These are some bad ones. This logo, this is actually the seal of the village of Whitesboro, New York. They swear that that's a settler and a native having a fun game of Indian wrestling.
Yeah, right.
It's pretty tough. They brought up some issues about cultural insensitivity, and
You think?
the village voted overwhelmingly to keep it exactly like it was. So be warned, don't always take everybody's opinion. This is the seal of Salisbury, Maryland, where they figured out how to get tomatoes, pumpkins, mustache, cucumber, blah, 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 all together. And my favorite example here is this top right corner. They actually refer to that as the Death Star Trench. So you win
Oh.
points for a Star Wars reference.
Oh.
It's supposed to be a building-lined street, but those buildings are 11 stories high, and the tallest thing in downtown Salisbury is 2 stories, so not sure where that came from. And then from my home state of South Carolina, this is St. Stephen. You can tell that there were 6 people that got to design this. They each came up with their own word. And look at how much fun recreation appears to be. But the thing that boggles my
The
mind
little
is,
feet.
it's the feet and the head of an American eagle with no wings.
But that eagle is really pissed off. Look at
It
him.
is pissed off. Well, because someone ripped its wings off.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a great example of trying to say everything and ended up saying nothing.
Yeah.
Rule number 4 is the screwdriver rule. You must have the right tool for the job. We kind of look to, and I'm going to call you out on the table here because this is where you've given me a little bit of a hiccup. We look to colleges and universities to kind of take this lesson. They always have an academic brand, and then they have an athletic brand. And in pulling this, it's kind of funny, this new MU brand, I don't know how long this has been around, but there are all these stories about how in the negative space between the M and the U is a donkey head, which I thought was kind of interesting. You see it?
Oh, looks like a
Oh.
rabbit.
Yeah, I never.
Oh, I never noticed that.
Oh, it
Or a
is.
rabbit.
Kind of like the MC.
Who
Never
knows?
noticed.
Yeah.
No matter what, it's not your mascot.
Right.
But you know, the main reason that they do this is, heaven forbid, the football team has a horrible season. They don't want it to affect admissions. So you want to have that continuity. They have the continuity of color, but they have just enough separation to kind of preserve the impacts of the two. We see this oftentimes in our local communities with this separation between a destination brand and our organization identities. Now here, the curveball that you have thrown me for is typically what a community has is they have a Main Street organization that uses the name Main Street. And that's the only tool that they have. So it makes my job easy because the destination is downtown. That's what they're promoting. So you have a Main Street logo for the group, and then you have a downtown logo for the community. Now here, your group is downtown Monroe City. And technically it's, you know, downtown Monroe City revitalization, but in very quick order, you have become known as DTMC. So I don't want to change that just to change it. You know, I don't want to change it just to fit my rule. So what I'm leaning towards, and I'd love to hear your thoughts here, is I do still think that we need to have a destination brand. Something that you can provide to the business community, something you can use to promote the entire community, and something you can share with the city government, but not a new city logo, if that makes sense. And the identity that I'm leaning towards is simply the identity of historic Monroe City. Historic Monroe City acknowledges that you have a historic downtown and a place that's got kind of a historic character, but it also doesn't draw the line in the sand where somebody out on the highway couldn't also use it to market themselves. Because the fact that you are historic is an attribute that the whole community shares instead of a geographic designation. And then DTMC is the organization and entity that is breathing life and vibrancy into historic Monroe City. Does that make sense?
10 years ago when we started our store, I did a brochure for just downtown.
Right.
And I went into all the businesses and I took like a picture of what they had and did that, and it was for downtown Monroe City, historic downtown Monroe City.
Yeah.
And it was a 3x, it was a threefold.
Right.
We just did it for the ones that were on it at that time, which you probably have a couple less now. But yeah, I just did that. Like each business donated $50, and I think I got 300
Gotcha.
brochures for it. I just
Yeah.
divided it up how much it cost. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and I mean it went over real well.
Good.
It's just people don't like to continue.
Right. Does that make sense? Does that pique any heartburn or anything?
No, I see what you're trying to say.
I get what you're trying to say. I'm not sure I'm big on the word historic. We are not St. Charles. St. Charles, Missouri,
Right.
is so totally historically captured the state, I think, more so than any place else. By the way they look, their cobblestones, they're everything.
And I completely get what you're saying, but I'm also here to say you can declare yourself historic, without going through and making everything yielding. It's one thing to say you're historic, it's another thing to put all of your eggs in the historic. That's not what I'm
afraid of.
suggesting. I'm simply suggesting kind of terminology.
There are things, because we're in a rural area.
Right.
Where St. Charles goes from very historic to very commercial to you know, from.
But their downtown is
It is.
is
Yeah,
historic.
absolutely.
There's so.
It's awesome.
Father Tompkins, you know, out there at the Rush Creek Church, it's not, 10 miles away now. I mean, there's things that can draw if we would just all work together, I think, to make it more historic.
I hear your concern. I tell you, I'm comfortable with what I'm thinking, and again, this fits into what I'm going to illustrate and show tomorrow. So I hear, and I feel pretty good about that. The big thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to kind of bounce that off of you. I mean, typically, if I was sitting down with you 2 years ago or 3 years ago before anything was done, I would say, okay, why don't we think about doing it this way? And I probably would say, hey, if you adopt a Main Street identity for your organizational name, then you tie into a statewide and national network, and this kind of makes sense. And don't get any heartburn over it being more than just Main Street, because this is just your organization identity. But and then I would say, downtown is the thing that you can promote. But honestly, for a community this size, I probably would have said downtown, like you're such a small place that you might not want to create this geographic divide that you can't get over. So let me just kind of throw it out tomorrow and see, because I feel good about what I'm hearing.
Well, I would also say history doesn't just mean the buildings.
Right.
And we do have a lot of history.
Right, it's also your culture, the things that happen in your community, the layout, it's all of those things combined. It's not just in the buildings.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, and honestly, Monroe City is blessed because of that lake out there.
Mm-hmm.
It came live in the early 1980s, and we have survived much because of that.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm sure.
It's growing.
And the people who are retiring to the lake area is what
Yeah.
feeds our bread and butter.
Gotcha.
And I guess 80s is history.
And it's growing. There's
I mean, you've been a realtor for 30
30
years.
years.
I mean, I know we have repeats, people that
Yeah.
come from St. Charles, and
Right.
even Springfield and stuff, they come out twice a year
Mhm.
just to come to Monroe. They like it so quick. And I mean, I think with the historic part, I can see what you're saying, Debbie. I mean, it kind of puts us, because some people don't, they think of history and they think of school and they think of history. It's like, I don't want to go there. But everything's getting revitalized, like historic. Everything's being taken back to its original bones. I mean, a lot of stuff is being done in this area, and I don't know if another buildings get taken, they might do that too. And I mean, they're kind of, the buildings are getting to tell their story.
Well, and that's the whole
Yeah,
thing.
figure out
It's
how to
like
do that better.
saying, it's funny. I come from South Carolina,
If
and
we were 1980 or 1930s town that was founded, somewhere, later. I mean, I mean, it wouldn't look right to say really,
Sure.
historic of the 50s or something like that.
got some cool stories though. You really do. I mean,
Oh,
all
yeah,
the
lots
way
of
down.
cool
I mean, one of the things that really kind of stuck with me, and I don't know whether it makes any difference in your mind or not, but like when you go back to the early founding, when the town was plotted, and then those initial plots were sold off, that happened on Independence Day.
Yep.
And to sit there and hear yesterday talking about how July 4th is one of the events, here, and then to know that it goes back to y'all
founding.
were sold. I mean, that's really pretty cool, and this whole idea of that connection to, you've got this like pedigree of independence.
And I think it's getting bigger every year. I mean, 4th of July.
Yeah.
It's just getting bigger.
Okay.
Okay.
So rule 5, a logo isn't Google Maps. Now, we've all seen these, the typical approach of a state outline with a star. I told you we were in Kirksville earlier this week. Guess what? They stole the city logo, because there's Kirksville and there's Monroe City. An hour and a half apart, but those stars look like they're the same place. So,
Same website designer.
probably so.
I don't know.
Going through this and kind of thinking about those tools, what you're going to see from me tomorrow, I always approach this from a branding toolbox where we're going to look at colors, we're going to look at typeface, we're going to look at graphics, and we're going to look at message. I'm going to show you a really, really quick example from a Main Street community in Michigan called Sault Ste. Marie. These are all the different logos that the community had bouncing around between their different entities. We were in there working with their Main Street organization, and these were the main ones that were kind of ours, and looking at the organization brand and the destination brand. As you see, they had a Downtown Development Authority, that was the organization name, and then Downtown Sault Ste. Marie was the destination they were promoting. They thought there that all you had to do to have brand consistency was to say, our color is blue. They had all different shades of blue. So I brought all the different logos together, and literally there were 6 different shades of blue in the different logos. So we introduced the idea of creating a more streamlined color palette, 5 colors, identifying typeface, 2 different typefaces that they use for connectivity, going through and figuring out how to deal with their name. Sault Ste. Marie's a weird name, so how do you figure out how to do it horizontal, the different stacked versions? You're going to deal with that a little bit with Monroe City being 2 different names. You're going to have several different versions of those logos. And there we just introduced a very simple icon system that allowed them to tell their story. These icons represented all different things to them. And again, it's very simple. Logos don't have to be self-explanatory. It's better when they're springboards for storytelling. So being able to use very simple symbols to help tell stories. These are the different downtown streets that make up their district. They have 3 distinct districts. But then introducing their Main Street identity, again, having 4 different colors that they use to highlight the 4-point approach. You guys are using black and yellow. Black and yellow are your colors. I'm probably going to add one, just so it doesn't always feel exactly black and yellow, but it won't be orange.
Okay.
This is very important.
I've learned that. Smart enough to know that. So now you see this kind of evolution of the organization brand, the destination brand. We showed how the elements can be incorporated into the city logo without really changing the city logo, but them adopting the word type, the Economic Development Corporation, how it makes its way into merchandising, different shirts, funny little sayings there. They have these things called the Sioux locks, so they have all these freighters that go through. We look at events and make the brand make its way into those events. So you see kind of the old on the left, new on the right, using the typefaces. Some are a little bit more closely connected with all the colors. So you start to see this whole system of storytelling. I'm going to be doing the same thing for you tomorrow morning. So I'm going to show you recommendations on destination brand, recommendations on kind of a long-term evolution on DTMC identity, and then how you can make its way into the events that you put on, so you can have this cohesive system and you can earn that brand equity. We'll look at things like wayfinding signage, so you can see how signage through the community might look with the brand integrated. I'll look at things like street banners, show how that might make its way into the community, how they'll work throughout the community. They had these veterans banners, and I can tell you, last thing in the world you want to do is say, I think you should take down those veterans banners. So moving to a 2-banner system that really worked for them. We designed a business recruitment guide for them. We helped them to identify a Welcome Back for Students program, and then even created mock advertisements and templates for them to tell those stories. So we're going to be doing the same thing for you for Monroe City, and that's what we're going to share tomorrow morning. So that's my quick overview. I have 3 minutes and 10 seconds before my time is done. Are there any questions that you guys have? Does that make sense? I know this is kind of like drinking out of a fire hose, but did that spark any questions that we didn't cover as we were going through?
No, but I think it's good information. I
Yeah.
mean, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially on the branding, because I think it's so difficult for a community. They always don't like what they come up with. At first, because we went through several, we really claimed the lake.
Folks that input, these guys were gathering information on your community, on how you felt about your community. And last night we did a presentation, educational type presentation on 2 Main Street points, the design point and the promotions point. And so this morning is kind of the grand finale, where you get to see things related to you in Monroe City. So from a design perspective for buildings and streetscape, Randy's going to show you what he's come up with for, we started out with 3 buildings and ended up being 4 or 5 buildings. And then Ben is going to talk about some branding and marketing materials and things like that. So turn it over to Randy.
Thanks, Keith. Well, good morning, everybody. How are you? Good. We're doing well? Okay, good. Well, I want to bring people who were not with us last night up to speed on some of the recommendations we made and kind of training tips we did, because my recommendations basically are fourfold as pertains to design and planning issues. And the first was, how do we deal with some of your vacant buildings? And again, the thing I want to remind people of, it is a rare town that doesn't have some vacancies. However, if we get lots of vacancies, then it can sort of send out a bad message about the perception of downtown. And so in those instances, one of the tricks or ways that we can quote unquote buy time until we get an occupant of the building or fix it up is to introduce what we call vacant building treatments. And the most important word I taught them last night was, test you, temporary. These are only meant to be temporary solutions to buy time until the building's occupied and fixed up, but they are helpful. And some of the strategies, of course, just involve installing public art, you know, behind the windows, just kind of a pop-up gallery, if you will. Here's an example of that from Anniston, Alabama, where they just had a pop-up gallery poster, put some temporary artwork in there, and that can be by local artists. It can especially be by student artists. What's the benefit of student art? Their friends and the mamas and the papas will come to see it. So occasionally, though, we can't occupy the inside of the space, and so other suggestions would be like Peoria, Illinois, where they simply took white butcher paper, printed a picture of a nostalgic street view, and people are so drawn to that historic image, they don't really consider the fact that the building remains empty. Of course, you've done something similar to this. This is from Paragould, Arkansas, and they needed to kind of conceal a vacant building, and so they took advantage of 2 vinyl clings to create what effectively is for downtown, like you would see at a mall, a directory, a map, and locations of restaurants and businesses and things of that nature. And then finally was this notion of how can we both conceal a vacant building, but also build community pride. And this was an example from Conway, South Carolina, where we just took 11 by 17 pieces of paper and created very simple statements of people and why they love this place, why they choose to live here, raise their kids here, work there, et cetera, et cetera. And so the beauty of this is, as you're drawn to read these stories of the people that you know, you go to church with, your kids go to school with, because there's one thing we've learned about Monroe City in the last 2 days. You all know each other, and my suspicion is you're all in each other's business, okay? So you might as well, you know, read cool stories about why you love this place and why you chose it. The second recommendation and training we did last night was this notion of how can we not so much artificially introduce vibrancy, i.e. elements of color, interactivity in our downtowns, but rather how can we, for relatively less money, infuse the downtown with significant installations that cause people to think there's a buzz, there's a cool factor, and introduce this concept we call downtown stickability. In other words, when people come down with their families, there's something for them to do and to stick around and enjoy in the downtown area. And so these amenities are the kind of things that would be in the public realm. You've probably seen these in major cities where they, you know, erect cornhole stations, bocce on lawns, movable chairs, and colorful bistro tables, just anything you can do like that. Introduce games and activities and pops of color. And then grants might be given we're about to talk about facades, but just as we often give facade grants, what if we also consider giving micro grants for vibrancy amenities that would populate the sidewalks and the public realm in front of businesses, again, to just introduce this notion of color and texture and things of this nature, like colorful benches and flowers, bikes, flowers, roll-up garage doors, and things of that nature. The third thing, of course, is how do we deal with these historic buildings and their facades or their faces? Because again, as we talked about last night, the assemblage of the buildings that you have in downtown Monroe City only exist in this one place on the planet. And that's why it's imperative that we care for them with our very best efforts, because it's your unique calling card. No other place on the planet has your buildings. A lot of other places have what you can find in the outskirts of your town and your restaurants, but not matching what you have downtown. And the concept that we introduced last night, and what was the toy that helped us remember what this was like? Mr. Potato Head. Thank you, Ben. Mr. Potato Head. The head is like the building, And the components of Mr. Potato Head are the lips and the nose and the eyes and the glasses and all this notion. And for a facade, the building is the potato, and the elements that we put on it are the doors and the windows and the awnings and the paint and the signage and all of those elements to give it its unique character. And the consideration here is to perhaps think about our facade grants more simply. Instead of funding overall grants for the entirety of the building that requires a lot of design savvy and a lot of money, what if we introduce micro grants for 1 or 2 elements at a time? In a given year, you would only have a grant for awnings, like this one in Beaufort, or signs like this in Hartsville, South Carolina. And you just simplify the decision making for the property owner so that they just simply have to ask and answer the question, do I need a new sign or not? Do I need a new awning or not? Do I need new paint or not? And it just simplifies the process, and the pot of money that you and or the city have available for these facade grants, therefore it goes farther and affects more people. The way I like to say it is more people get to play. Yes, they get smaller amounts of money, but I think more buildings being affected with smaller sums of money is better than only a few buildings being affected by a lot of money. Okay? I hope that makes sense to you. So now I'm going to roll out. Did you drop your rendering in there? Perfect. Yes, perfect. We rendered, I'd say 4 buildings, but they're really, like in this case with Mindy's building, there's an addition and another one. So we have like 4 or 5 buildings. So I met with Darren, and what Darren told me was that Mindy wanted to paint her building purple. And that wasn't true? Oh, well, I got the pink stripes. Okay, yeah. No, they have plans for this complex where they want to add an addition over here to the right. And so one of the things that we considered is how can we unify these two together? And I'm just going to go on the record is typically I don't recommend painting unpainted brick. But there's a reason why we chose to do that here. And let me just finish that thought. The reason we typically don't like to paint unpainted brick is that you introduce a maintenance issue for the life of the building moving forward. But there are certain instances where it's okay to break that rule. And this is one of them. And I hope I don't offend you. I mean, this is just it's a simple building. You know, it is not particularly ornate. You know, it's probably built in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. It's what we would call now kind of a low, mid-century international style building. Very simple. That's not a criticism. It's just a statement of fact. And so the consideration is because we have different kinds of block and brick, we're about to introduce a new one which may not be able to match. Painting it all could unify it, especially if we painted it all purple with pink stripes, okay? So anyway, based on some input that Darren and I had, this is what we kind of came up with, is this addition that goes off to the side, recessed a little bit to the back. And again, Mindy, and I hope it's okay with you, I'm sorry I didn't have input from you, but I just kind of relocated your big panel sign to just the icon here. And this treatment, this sort of deco period canopy with the letters on top, it's just a very international style treatment. And so I would actually say it actually makes the character of this building more of its style, okay? And then of course the building to the right, where we're going to let Darren live, it's gonna match very much kind of the profile of this fascia, stepped up and going back down. A little bit of a simpler canopy so that we're not trying to pretend that these two buildings were built at the same time, but we are trying to make them relate. And what I just simply did here, Darren, was just chose not to paint the area to receive A&S printing. And then over here, you could either apply that via decal or paint it onto the building itself. So again, before and after. So the Opera House, which now houses a wonderful antique store and gift shop and things of this nature. I enjoyed meeting with Penny and was it Sarah? Sally. Okay, I was close. In Georgia. And again, I think what makes this building interesting and unique is everybody knows it as the Opera House, right? Yeah, I mean, everybody, that's kind of its claim to fame. And so Ben and I brainstormed this one quite a bit, and we decided to make a very bold gesture. I'm really glad you two are sitting down. just in case.
As long as the walls hasn't blown out.
You know, I promise it hasn't. Matter of fact, I would like to humbly hope that we've actually taken it back closer to its historic character rather than farther away. Again, by way of statement of fact, not being critical, I think we all understand that this sort of faux cedar shingle thing. It was not obviously a part of the original building. And they owned this building as well. And so the two, while being very different styles, they do need to relate to each other. So we're going to look at treatments to both of these. I'm going to show the overall, and then we'll unpack it a little bit. You ready? All right, here we go.
Stay seated.
Look, she's taking pictures. This is making me nervous. So here's what we consider. Oh, that's a good reaction. Okay, good.
And it's got John Deere in it.
Oh, there you go. And that's exactly what we were thinking. Yeah.
So John Deere.
In case I age.
All right. So first of all, to give them credit, they intuitively understood good color theory. You know, if you take a really close look down here, you're going to see that they chose very good, what we call triadic colors, colors that are 3 colors equidistant on the color wheel. And in this case, it's sort of that tan off-white, the green, kind of an apple green, and then the rust red. That's a wonderful color scheme, and all I've tried to do is just play up that color scheme even more in the paint colors as well as the awning itself. I want to zoom in and then we'll come right back. To me, this is a really important detail on life of the building. You have this recessed panel that was always intended for something like this, and so while I was tempted to put the descriptive text down here, Opera House Antiques and Uniques, I think Ben was correct in warning me that would have just made this area extremely busy. Between the awning, the star retaining things, the windows, and the new opera. And so we opted to put it in that recessed panel. And I think it actually helps the upper facade because now you don't have all of that blank space. And if you can spare the money for 2 gooseneck lights via a grant or whatever, I think it really helps anchor that. And I think at night it will wash that facade with nice light. Finally, we'll go one forward into this one. This building on the left, we've obviously replaced the windows. And if you were there last night, what Ben and I are recommending is signage would be your first facade grant, and then second would be upper floor windows, just because of the need that we saw in your downtown. And so look at the power and the difference just going from that to this. And then by virtue of painting the architectural trim, we actually draw out some detail that was always there, but we just didn't notice it when it was all painted the same color. So again, that's the Opera House, and I'm glad you liked it. Next is the dugout. And I'm really glad you're sitting down, young man. No, so the beauty of this building is Aaron and his granddad basically gave us carte blanche. And the beauty about this building in terms of a design response is twofold. Number one, and again, I don't mean this as criticism, it's pretty much a blank canvas, okay? It's just a solid white building, so pretty much anything goes. But secondly, the uses, you know, a sports bar with a really great name just conjure up lots of fun responses for you guys. So you ready? All right, here we go. So here's what we're proposing for the dugout.
Oh, that's awesome.
You like it? Okay, good.
That is so cool.
And
All right.
smart, no KC, it's St. Louis.
Yeah,
Sorry, but
as a Red Sox fan, this pained me greatly, but I was willing to do
very
it
smart.
for you all.
Safe for you all.
All right, so let's unpack these details just a little bit. Number one, and most importantly, we can't lose sight of the fact that the overall brand is the dugout.
Right.
And so that's why it's anchored centered and it's kind of larger than anything else. Just to make sure that they understand the entire complex is a dugout, even though it has 2 kind of different uses between the sports bar and the steakhouse. Now let's zoom in a little bit closer because this is where the fun starts. So in both instances, we played up with kind of baseball cards and souvenir, programs. So on the left, of course, if you want to have sort of a sub sign, the Dugout Sports Bar can anchor this solid panel. Since the other one was solid, and this one only had a tiny window for the game area, we thought just creating both of them solid would actually bookend it, and you could have more strong graphics. Feel free to keep the door where you want, but what we tried to do, since we knew we were going to have 2 roll-up garage doors here, is use a similar sort of architectural style there with windows in the doors, and that way everything is symmetrical. But again, so this would be your entry into the sports bar area. On the right side, of course, we would propose you let that be the entrance to the steakhouse. Now, if you zoom in, Ben came up with a super clever name for the steakhouse, and that would be the bullpen. You get it?
Oh, yeah.
Got it? Okay, good. All right.
That's pretty good.
So we got the dugout, which is for the sports bar, and the bullpen is for the steakhouse. And of course, if you eat outside, you eat in the what? The outfit. Okay.
Well, that is so good.
And so it just
Oh, you all have way too much fun with this.
Yeah.
Way
You
too
should
much.
have seen that.
So again, it just kind of weaves the entire theme together. So again, back to before, and everybody goes, ooh, yes.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Like it's sold.
Are those murals?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, Mindy, because let me give you your two options. The question was, are these murals painted on? You have two options. One is, yes, you can paint them. I would option for a second thing that Darren and I talked about the other day. There's a new material on the market. It's called Illumographic. Think of it like fancy aluminum foil that you can print on. And it's kind of basically it's a decal for sidewalks and buildings. And at a fraction of the cost, you can put a print on that material and just, it has its own adhesive and you apply it to it. At a fraction of the cost, you don't have to get somebody to hand paint it. That's what I would encourage. And the beauty is, on a wall where you don't walk on it, it's going to last a good long time, at least as long as paint. If you've been in big cities, you've been walking on a sidewalk and you saw something stuck on there that promoted a coming attraction or a restaurant, that's exactly what you're looking at. That's that Illumographic material. So those are the two options.
Is there licensing issues with?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah.
So you gave them this awesome idea. No, you're probably gonna get sued if you use
Hey,
it.
I'm an idea guy. Y'all are the
I'm sure they've
implementation
got
people.
some
Well,
good lawyers.
okay,
Yeah.
let me weigh in on it real quick. Go back to agreement.
Yeah.
So part of the reason that we suggested what we did on the sides, couple polls from a strategy standpoint. First of all of these this is like art and imagery that goes back to the 30s. So the art itself is entered into the public domain. So that's a good thing.
Oh, okay.
Second thing, the reason we're using pre-existing art on those super graphics on the wings is it's art instead of signage. So
good.
when you get into the world of sign ordinances, a lot of times what they do is they compare the sign square footage to the whole building square footage. So this would now be public art instead of being building signage. So kind of a twofold there, always looking at old traditional art or photography that's entered into the public realm, and then making sure to have those graphic elements where they can be public art contributions instead of strictly determined as signage.
Good.
Great question.
And I'm glad we paused because I forgot to mention something in the foreground that's really important. That roadway is super wide. And if you just go half a block that way, this parallel parking is already there. And I think if you continued it here, you're going to narrow the travel width so people aren't driving farther. You're going to introduce that parking, keep it separate from the restaurant itself. And just clarifying the travel lanes would be a really good gesture on that street. Ben did me a solid. He rendered this old building. And do you want to say anything about it first?
I think you got it.
Okay, well, the reason we felt like this was important is this building is about to come on the market once you guys move into the new purple and pink building. And it also, it's of a scale that we almost refer to as micro retail. And so it's not so large so that a small, vintage clothing, gourmet popsicle, ice cream shop could easily go in here. Or in this case, Ben rendered it as a women's clothing shop. And again, in a real simple gesture, a wood storefront that could be constructed easily. These nice complementary colors of the green and the red. Again, complementary on the color wheel itself. And given your proximity to the lake, choosing a name that's this really veiled reference to nearby assets. Anything else you want to add to? Okay. Thank you.
The only thing I will say is, when picking out colors on that particular material type, I knew that there were some structural issues that have been talked about, some investment that needed to happen into the building. I selected a dark face color because it would be very forgiving when you paint the current material. It would allow the entire facade to get the most cost-effective update. So that's why typically you don't necessarily see quite as dark, but it's so deep and textural. That's why I went with that color.
So we're going to conclude with a really big, bold vision of some revisions to your streetscape. And I want to be very clear, even before I show it. As a matter of fact, you should wait. But This is a long-term vision. This is a long-term picture. But there are things that you can start doing incrementally Monday, next month, next year, and for the next 5 to 10 years to accomplish this purpose. But for those who weren't with us last night, there are 4 C's, 4 critical C's when it comes to streetscape. Y'all want to do a pop test, see who can remember? No, I don't want to do that to you.
I took notes.
Go for it. The canopy or the trees, the corners, the crosswalks, and the creature comforts. Okay, and so here to reflect as pertains to canopies and trees. This is the city where I work in every week, and again, for those of you know who Roberta Burns or her mom, this is the city where she lives and she works all the time. And so this was a photograph taken only 7 years ago, 2012. The next one is 2019, and it's shockingly different. And one of the primary reasons is just the presence of trees and landscaping. So yes, there are improvements to the buildings. We're not going to deny that, but just look at the powerful impact of trees and flowers and shrubs and things of that nature. It makes a dramatic input. Our corners are really important places because they typically occur at intersections in our streetscapes. And that's an opportunity to introduce planters, to introduce color, to introduce flowers, to introduce public art, and just really transform those moments that occur in intervals in your downtown. Third was crosswalks. And why are the crosswalks important? Because the texture slows the automobile down, and the color gives this, what's the word? I didn't sleep a lot last night. The distinction, yes, between the environment and the pedestrian. And that way, again, because what is our philosophy about downtown streetscapes? Downtown belongs to the people. We allow cars to go through it, but it's primarily for walking, okay? And so we want every treatment downtown to first, be primarily for the pedestrian, and then secondarily to promote automobile safety. And then finally is the treatments, the creature comforts, the benches and the chairs, and of course we've already seen that in the amenities section. So here you are, hold your breath because it's going to be a big, bold vision. I'm going to show everything in the first slide, and then we're going to go back and pick it apart, okay? So here's the current, and then this is the proposed. There we go. All right, so a couple of things at a time. So let's zoom in a little bit. First, the trees. Again, just introducing the trees and the shade. For those of us who did the walking tour on, what day was that? Wednesday? How hot would you say it was?
Hot.
Yeah.
Hot.
700, we're going to get to that. 753 degrees on Wednesday downtown. And to me, just adding a few trees lowers the temperature visually a great deal.
We would have enjoyed the shade.
We would have enjoyed the shade very, very much. Secondly, are the crosswalks. And again, look at the distinction between the woman and this arbitrary attorney. Now that there's a clarity and a distinction between them in the environment that is a signal to the motorist to slow down. And then these corner treatments, again, that introduce flowers and public art and things of that nature. Again, you don't park there and you don't drive there, so don't let that wasted real estate go to waste. Those are great opportunities for things like this. And last but not least, as you said, Mindy, this wall is just begging. It cried out to me, please paint a mural on me, okay? And again, it just really does a nice number on treating this end of town as a gateway. So again, we lost the before somewhere. Here we go.
Okay, we like this better.
Yep, before, and here's the after. So those are my recommendations. I hope that resonates with you, and I hope you like them, and I appreciate your time and your input.
Well, they're transitioning real quick. I know we have quite a few new folks. I want to make sure you got on the sign-in. Debbie's taking care of you because we're part of a USDA grant, and we need to know who's been in attendance. All right, Beth.
All right, that's pretty awesome for getting here Wednesday, right? One of the things that I'm not sure whether Randy said, as far as the trees go, not only did trees make it more comfortable, but just like he said, that shadow, the shadow that it cast out on the roadway creates a contrast in the roadway. It's amazing how having a tree makes people drive slower. It's weird how that works, but for some reason, motorists don't like to run into trees. So, anything that you can do to kind of create that sense of comfort, but then also create the diversity in the environment. So, with this, we're going to move into branding. We've seen a lot of visuals. This is where we start to get into our storytelling. as we went through, we looked at some of the things that already existed. Strangely enough, it seems as though you had pretty firmly selected your colors already. Right? Yeah. Black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. We're not messing with that, right? I loved this. I pointed out how, it's always nice to see a mascot, but then having the M and C hidden in there, and I think some people didn't realize it was in there, so that's a nice little gesture of your little MC. So one of the things that I did want to do is I wanted to first start with colors. Obviously, we know we're going to stick with black and yellow, but when we're doing marketing for a community level, it's always nice to have a little bit more than just two. When you have two colors, everything is very, very much athletic. That is kind of the philosophy behind athletic branding and that kind of color theory. So all I did was I kind of solidified our black and our yellow, and then I added a nice light blue just so that we could have enough colors to not have everything always look two color. It also pushes us into a 4-color process print anytime we print anything, which means we make more money. No, I'm just kidding. It makes things a little bit more dynamic. The next thing that I wanted to do was look at typeface. What is the font that we use? Now, in your current logo, if I go back to that, the DTMC. Now, I'm going to make fun of you a little bit. I do this every week. You made a very interesting decision to turn downtown into 2 words. I don't see that often, but amazingly, this organization has become known as DTMC almost instantaneously. So when you see something like that, it's kind of like, all right, we're not messing with that. We're going to stick with that. But this typeface that was selected, it doesn't necessarily lend for a whole lot of expansion. So we want to make sure that you have a typeface that conveys Monroe City well, and you can use and incorporate into your events. If you go back and look at some of the things that have done, your marketing is really, really good. I was able to look at street stroll posters from 2018 and see how they evolved into 2019, and it's almost like everything is starting to click and get better and better. But what we're going to do now is show what it looks like if you have a whole foundation before you start. And then you can just kind of cook with gas from there. So from a typeface standpoint, I selected 3 different typefaces. The primary is kind of a thick, narrow, what's called serif typeface. I'm going to tell you this. You don't have to tell anyone else this. Strangely enough, the typeface I selected is called the bartender. I don't know whether that means anything or not, but the thing that I really liked about it is it came with a clean version, and then it also came with a slightly distressed version that mimicked the treatment that was already seen in the previous DTMC logo. So we could have some continuity between those things moving forward. The secondary is just a really clean, what's called a sans serif typeface. If you were my wife, you would look at that and say, that looks really sanitary and sterile. From a design standpoint, those typefaces are called content neutral. It means they don't carry character with them. It allows you to kind of add meaning into it. It allows you to be both traditional and contemporary at the same time. And then this accent typeface, these are really hard to read. I incorporated this in here because there's an appropriate place for accent typefaces. But the problem is, communities that think they're pretty go and pick these and they're not legible. Communities that think they're old go and pick an old-looking typeface. You don't have to do that. This is just an accent, and you'll see how that gets used. So when we start to look at that, one of the nice things about this is look at how handsome that makes your name. Now, your name is the city of Monroe City. Monroe City is an interesting dynamic. You need to have the ability to have something that's both stacked, horizontal, all the different layouts. So I'm going to show you how that all comes together. So once we look at colors, once we look at typeface, the thing that I really started to tag into was the message. Now, you have a statement, Queen of the Prairie. Okay? That has been around for a very long time. I've seen documents all the way at least back to 1904 where Queen of the Prairie was used. So when you have a phrase like that, any intelligent branding expert does not recommend that you dispose of that. If it has lasted that long, there's something there of value. But I think we can all agree it's also not our only tool. So what I try to do with something like that is I kind of make a place for it. I call it a moniker. A moniker is something that you keep forever. I think back to Randy and I were working in a community in South Carolina called Beaufort, and they had a phrase, Queen of the Sea Islands. And they'd had that phrase for 100 plus years. Guess what? You get to keep that forever, but that's not your main story. The second thing that really jumped out to me that I really liked was in looking at your history, the community was originally divided into plots, and then they were auctioned off on July 4th. You became a place on Independence Day. I like that. There's something about that in this kind of stream of patriotism that still exists today. And then you move into the mid-1900s and you see that one of your first major manufacturing industries was all based around die casting. And in that industry, you've got a lot of words that really are kind of interesting. Things like shaping, molding, impression. So I think that those are the things that kind of inspired some of the messages. I'm not recommending a single tagline today. I think that you guys have done a really good job with storytelling. So I'm going to throw out a bunch of options as we go throughout the day. Does that make sense? So we start out with the destination brand. Okay? With the destination brand, I wanted to give you something for the community that the whole community could use. I wanted to give you something that was really traditional, kind of start complicated and move simpler. So what I designed is I just kind of designed this setup where we've got our stacked Monroe City. We've got a little composite that I made of your gazebo and your water tower. And I took some creative license with how the buildings actually exist in relation to one another. But we've got the wedge and we've got the turret building. And then this simple idea of born of independence. It's a really interesting phrase that talks about your independent spirit, but also talks about your history. Now, from here, you can see with a logo like this, it works in two color, it works in one color, so you've got simplicity built in. But then where it really starts to grow legs is knowing that you have all these different variations so that you can say the right thing at the right time. And with this slide, I introduced kind of an interesting variation that comes in, where you don't always have to talk about downtown Monroe City. Downtown Monroe City is a district. It's a geographic place with boundaries. But the idea of historic Monroe City, that is a value. That is a shared storyline, and it's a shared storyline that truly applies to the whole community. So you can use both downtown and historic interchangeably in your messaging. And then that way, if you're ever in a place where you need to tell a story and you don't want to put up those geographic boundaries, you can always lean on historic Monroe City. Does that make sense? Then you are a community that is so proud of your athletics. I wanted to kind of heart what?
Previous slide, talk about the other taglines.
Oh, thank you. Couple other things here. This idea of everyday escape. I wanted to be able to have some messaging that helped you to tie into the lake, the mentality that people are using to get away and get to the lake. Feels like home. We kept hearing this hometown value, this kind of place that was easy to relate to. So again, you can have this series of changeable messages based off what your goal is and where you're taking your message. Thank you. So with our monogram, what's kind of cool here, we designed this interlocking MC for Monroe City. You might also see MO for Missouri. This is it's a design style that's very prevalent for athletics. But I think with the pride that we saw and with all the different things that kind of revolve around that goal of we want to have something really simple and iconic that we can use. So we just kind of introduced that acronym, the monogram, and you can really gain some traction there through use. People might not know what it is when they first see it, but as they start to see it over and over again, it starts to make sense. So then from there, we start to look at the organization brand. Again, we have this DTMC logo now, just kind of showing over time, you can simplify that, which might make it easier to slap on things. You don't necessarily want to have to fight with this every time you just want to slap it on a poster and that kind of stuff. Introducing this kind of idea of breaking the mold. You know, it's one of the things that this organization is focused on change and focused on making a difference and really realizing the uniqueness of the community. So having kind of these bold messages, being able to take that and showing this is a place where you can get involved and contribute to the community and volunteer. Organizations in the community can keep their logos the same, but can adopt word type and typeface to be able to be part of the system without feeling like they're abandoning everything that they've ever had. Now, I show this with caution, but I obviously have tremendous respect for the pride of the community. So just kind of showing how it can make its way into, you know, the school. I did a slightly updated Panther. You can leave that on the table, but I always like to do it because I just feel like there's a lot going on there. Kids really, really love connection with brands. Younger people they're much more brand astute than older are. I think that's just it's just a universal truth. So when they see their own community kind of with this fresh face, especially as the pride relates to their school, it gives them an ego boost. Where I live now, we're a community of about 14,000. We've got one high school in our community. The mascot is the Buccaneer. For 40 years, the mascot has been a really, really poorly drawn pirate. Looked like somebody literally drew it as the plane was landing, if you know what I mean. So we did an update of that logo, and it's been amazing how we've started to see people wearing stuff and that kind of pride making its way through again. And from a fundraising standpoint, kind of selfishly, when you introduce a slightly modified image, you get an opportunity to make some more money. So just something to think about. Now, where it gets fun is when we get into what's called brand extension. Okay, so we've looked at the place and we've looked at the groups. How does it make its way into the events? So your events have had really, really great marketing, but this shows how you can take in the typeface, you can take in the colors, and just kind of create this dynamic of continuity. One of the things that we often do, and it's a mistake that we make in designing for our events, is we kind of design them into a vacuum. So people will go to an event, they'll have a great time at an event, but that great time won't transfer into positive connotation for the district or the place. So making sure that you connect those dots is really, really important. You've got this great event that's going through with the street stroll, keeping this nice and simple, having adaptations for things like your Christmas stroll, so you can see how that can kind of build. Again, seeing how the brand can make its way into merchandise. Obviously, Lori has showed us very clearly that you guys know how to merchandise here because she has worn proudly Monroe City stuff at every meeting. So like every time she comes in, it's like, what's Lori going to have on now? Because I know it's going to be yellow. You know, I always like to show things like this. This idea of what we call brand co-oping, taking brands that people know and then associating your community to that brand that already has value. I've got a 16-year-old who I remember the first time she came and asked me for a Swell bottle, and it literally, you would have thought she was asking me to buy her a car. And I realized it was because it was a $45 water bottle. I'm like, what in the world is this all about? But when you do this, what you start to do is you start to take the cachet, the value, the cool factor of the brand that exists and contribute it back to your community. We can all imagine this. If we're really interested in outdoor recreation, we know there are outdoor recreation brands that we could siphon off from. If we're really into sports, we know there's sport brands that we can siphon off from. So when you're making merchandise, don't always try to find the cheapest product. Think about the fact that those pre-existing brands do have value. Having simplicity, having merchandise that's accessible. I made the joke last night, oftentimes in communities, what we either have high school related stuff or we have car wash t-shirts. You know, there's shirts that are so ugly that you only cut the grass or paint in them, right? So being able to have stuff that's a little bit more focused on the kind of things people would want to wear. Making it out and making the brand make its way into signage. A lot of times we over-design signage. Trying to keep this nice and simple, having gateway signs at our boundaries, having re-announcing kind of arrival into downtown districts and special districts and trailblazers along the way so we don't lose them. But one of the things I'd love to introduce here is these are really expensive. And if you decide you're going to take this on as a project, you're going to get depressed really quickly because it costs a lot to do one of these signs, especially if you're working alongside MoDOT. So here you might consider more of a guerrilla wayfinding system through pedestrian scaled temporary signage. These signs were inspired by a project called Walk Your City. It was a master's project for a student at NC State. And what he did was in the dark of night, he went up and put a series of wayfinding signs like this up through Raleigh. And they were up in Raleigh for over a month before the city realized that there wasn't any department in the city that was responsible for them. So then they pulled them down, and the outcry from the community was so great that the city then recreated them, this time in metal permanent, and put them back up. So being able to kind of think about this in the context of typically when we see signs, the sign says, hey, this is how many miles you have to go to get away from here. Where these signs say, this is how many minutes you have to walk or ride a bike to explore something cool. And they can be very conversational.
Hey Ben, just mention to them, the Walk Your City website is active. You can really go there today, and they've made it step by step. You enter your data, you hit send, pay for it, you print it out, and send it right to you. It's a ready to install packet from start to finish on the website.
Yeah, it is. It's walkyourcity.org, I believe. Street banners. These are some designs you might consider with street banners. One of the cool things, again, because of your color selection, you've got this simplicity that comes out with the designs. I think a lot of times people over-design these banners, but one of the nice things about a simple color palette is it helps to kind of push you that way. I try to design these where they're going to be affordable to produce, but also create an impact. We could sit there and we could be frustrated by all the buildings that need thousands and thousands of dollars worth of facade renovations that we don't have money for, or we could spend $1,000 and put banners up and make all those buildings invisible. You know, when you design these the right way, you lower the ceiling, you change the focal point, you kind of shrink everything in. And believe it or not, we've also seen that when you introduce banners into a downtown environment, the simple presence of color and movement on the banner posts slows traffic. So something to consider there. Now, I'm showing you a lot of stuff, but I also want to see if we can provide some clarity to you. So we're going to give you a couple of other tools. The first is what we call how to be a brand partner. And what this is intended for the business community, event organizers, and community groups. And all it does is it literally has a giant list of different ways that you might be able to benefit or incorporate the brand. From there, we're going to share with DTMC a comprehensive strategy guide of launching the brand. There is a myth that there's an appropriate order. That order is different community by community, week by week, based off of, funding, and hey, I just found a grant, and hey, we just got a new council member elected. So to act like there is a fixed roadmap is a fallacy. But to understand the long-term goal of all the things you want to try to accomplish is key for that clarity. And then in addition to that, we're going to share with you a brand score sheet that allows DTMC on a periodic basis, once every 2 years or so, to go through and score your own implementation and help you to identify what things might make most sense for you to focus in on next. So that's what I was able to do. Love to take a chance to open it up for questions for Randy or I.
I don't have a question, but I love it all.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's awesome.
Aren't they great?
They're wonderful.
Thanks.
On behalf of our community, we want to thank you guys for coming because this is different. This is different and can be life-changing for our community if we learn how to implement it. And
Hey, your
we are
nails-
very appreciative.
Your nails are,
And
There you go.
I'm already doing examples.
That might have been the inspiration.
Thanks.
So I want to say this, and Randy and I, it's hard to believe this, but Randy and I have been working together for almost 20 years. So obviously I met him when I was 7. And, the thing that we have come to realize is people get hung up on money. It's typically when you talk about this,
somebody will sit there and whether they say it out loud or whether they just say it under their breath, they're like, well, that's all well and good, but how much is it going to cost? Well, you know, that's not the conversation for today. The fact of the matter is that there are a lot of different ways that communities can get help. But the thing that you need to know is that momentum drives momentum. And passionate people are that starting point for where a community builds that momentum. Randy and I have been unbelievably excited being here in Monroe City. The personalities that we've come across, the passion and energy that we have seen, we are confident that everything that we're showing you is completely possible. And the thing is, and I don't know who the smart person was that asked somebody from USDA to be on the board, but that was brilliant. You know, entities like USDA that has grants for rural communities all across America, foundations and you know, different grant funders. The thing you realize is people with money like to fund communities that actually do things. So as you start to build that track record, you will find support becomes easier and easier and easier. And then all of a sudden the question you start to ask is, well, gosh, we got a potential for a $400,000 grant, but we need to figure out a $50,000 match. Where are we going to pull that from? You know, and it's not where do we get the big dollars, it's where do we assemble the small dollars to leverage the big dollar support. So I just want you to know that from a community that, or from somebody who sees communities every single week, don't pull the rug out from under yourself. You have the ingredients you need, and because of the size of your community, the impact that you can make and the change that you can see in pretty short order is truly amazing. I guarantee you, we are interested to see what Monroe City of 2022 looks like. So,
And the great thing about these two is that they gave you really short-term things you can do,
Yeah.
medium-term, and then some long-range goals. You know, 2 or 3 years down the road, you work up to those things. So it's all scalable. Hold on, before you stop it.
okay.
Tell them what happens next with the logos and branding.
Fantastic. So everything that you see now becomes yours. I'm going to separate out. We're going to give you about 2 weeks or so for DTMC to get back together, review the recommendations, offer up any refinements, and then we're going to create a comprehensive resource package for you. Every logo that you see, we're going to save in 5 different file formats. We're going to give you the typefaces. We're going to define the colors. We're going to create a style guide for consistency, and we're literally going to make all those resources available to you through a single link that'll live online forever. So if your hard drive crashes or you know somebody moves away, you always have access to it. We believe in removing those barriers, making these tools available to as many people as possible, because the more passionate people that are using them, the more brand equity that you create. So literally our goal would be, if we can get that feedback, you know, in a timely fashion, we can literally get the whole toolbox back to you by the end of the month. So, awesome. Great. All right. Thank you so much.